Guest, Mr. Pete Sepp joins us. He's the president of the National Taxpayers Union. Going to talk a little bit about some of the treats that you may find in what Congress is working on with their $3.5 trillion tax and spend plan, which I think they've trimmed it down to about $2 trillion. Well, we'll talk with Pete Sepp about that right now. Hey, good afternoon, Pete. Thanks so much for being here on The Voice of Texas.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you on the program, and I'm glad you're taking a look at this $3.5 trillion tax and spend plan, because most in Congress who are voting for it or want to vote for it and push this, they don't even look at it, so they don't even know what's in it.
That's right. And boy, if they looked hard, they'd find a whole lot of problems with it. There is, of course, the Civilian Climate Corps, a take on the old New Deal program that put a lot of people to work doing things like helping to clear forests and the like. Well, that's not what this is. This is a program of more climate activism at taxpayer expense. I don't really have a dog in the fight over climate change. Some of you may think it's an urgent problem, and I don't dispute that. But why are taxpayers funding an agency like that at a time when we need to be thinking about our fiscal future, too, and the ability of the United States to remain economically competitive when it's got a debt ratio to its annual economic output of something like 140%. That's getting into third world territory. And we need to...
It's interesting. You mentioned third world territory when it comes to global warming or global climate change or whatever the terminology they want to use today. Understand the biggest polluters on the planet, which never gets addressed, are India and China and these other countries compared to where we do things relatively clean. But that's always left out. The point is somehow left out. The point is somehow they want to take more of our money and they want to do this clean electricity program, which, to be honest with you, from what I can tell, we've probably got the cleanest electricity on the planet at this point, at least reliable electricity. But nonetheless, it's not going to stop them from taking literally billions of our tax dollars, turn around and go into these projects. There's a lot of other things in this as well, and I want to make sure we hit on a few of them. One of them is what you guys refer to as, I guess, more like a shell game, including the cost of child tax credits and things along those lines. There's a whole lot in this that people just don't know about.
Yes, indeed. The expansion of the child tax credit, which may be a good thing in some cases if it's properly designed and limited, is really the victim right now of Democratic Party politics. They're trying to massively expand the program to the point where in the upper income range might become eligible for this thing. And that's counter to their own goal of trying to limit the tax breaks to the middle class. But the problem is all taxpayers could end up on the hook because this is a refundable credit that could be designed. And refundable means that a taxpayer can get back more from a tax credit than they actually owe in taxes. That little refundable portion comes directly out of the U.S. Treasury, someone else's pocket. And there have been discussions here in Washington to say, well, let's just not count that part toward the budgetary total. We'll just say it's a revenue program and wink and a nod, and suddenly a couple $100 billion is shaved off the cost of the plan, at least the advertised cost. That is a shell game. That's a gimmick. And we also have word games being played here. There's something called a methane fee in this budget plan, and that's going to be assessed against polluting producers. Well, what it really is doing is charging natural gas producers a tax, and when they get charged a tax, it's passed along to the rest of us in higher prices for the natural gas that we're hoping to pay for and be able to afford.
Boy, that is no joke. We're talking with Pete Sepp, the president of the National Taxpayers Union. If you want to go check him out online, the website is ntu.org. That is ntu.org. Is ntu.org. Pete, here's one of the other things. You mentioned maybe a tax credit that could be a good thing that might be in there, but of course it's not. It never is when they get in, and somehow they're going to save us money and do better things for all of us by charging us, well, out the wazoo. There's another thing in there that I think all of us pretty much can can universally agree, is the IRS to go snoop into our bank accounts. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things they want to do and now what they're changing it to.
Yeah, this is an evolving plan. And originally the proposal was that anyone with an account that had an annual inflow or outflow of $600 would be subject to having the total amount, not the details, reported to the IRS on an annual basis. Well, then the proposal evolved a bit, and they're not just going to want to report the total amount. In other words, the banks would have to furnish that information to the IRS, but they'd also have to report if there were any cash transactions, if there were transfers between accounts, if money was going overseas. So they want more details. And the amount of supposedly uncollected tax revenue that could be gained from this information has been put at $439 billion over 10 years, which is just an implausible figure. And now the proposal's being modified again, and they say, well, the threshold will be $10,000 instead of $600. That's an improvement, I suppose. But they also are saying, and we'll safeguard the information of things like wage payments that you get through an automatic payroll system or large purchases for a home. We're going to exempt that from the IRS information requirement. Well, when you start doing that, you're going to make the system so complicated that banks will have a hard time even complying with it, and you'll compound the possibility of errors. That's a real problem, because if the IRS gets its hands on information that's wrong to begin with, they might proceed with examinations and audits on that information, and then the taxpayer is left to try to face the bureaucracy and say, you need to correct this. Millions of Americans are going to spend millions of hours and possibly billions of dollars just trying to get their tax bills right, and it was never their fault in the first place.
You know, it's astonishing. We're talking with Pete Sepp, president of the National Taxpayers Union, and you're absolutely right. Giving the IRS more authority to get into our bank accounts, first of all, I don't see how that's even constitutional, but nonetheless, we've learned they don't really care about constitutionality. And then as you nature of this, now you got people having to go and deal with the IRS, which we know would never be politicized, which we've now seen in multiple administrations to go after their political enemies. This couldn't possibly be used to do things. Here's the thing I'm interested in, Pete. I would like, if they're going to try to do this, can we put something in there that says we go get to look at the politicians, bank accounts and see where their money's coming from?
Yeah, somehow I think they would not agree to a provision like that. But most importantly here, this is part of an $80 billion, basically 50% increase in the IRS's budget. And probably agree that the IRS needs to put more funding into things like answering its phones and getting the questions that taxpayers want to know right when they demand an answer. That's not where most of this money is going. In fact, Congress's own budget scorekeeper has said about 80% of the $80 billion is going to go into more enforcement. We don't have the taxpayer rights safeguards fully in place yet to be able to ensure that people aren't going to get wrongly accused and spend a lot of time and money trying to defend their innocence. We need guardrails on anything the IRS is doing going forward.
Boy, I agree 100%. We're talking with Pete Sepp, president of the National Taxpayers Union. NTU.org is the website if you want to go check it out. Before we run out of time, Pete, here's another thing. Clearly, the things that you've already talked about, kicking up our energy prices. We've already seen that happening, and this is only going to make it go up even more. And this more spending will lead to more inflation. There's other things they're doing in this that really is it's going to be bad news for our economy, like some of the higher taxes they want to do or the corporate tax rate. None of these things seem to be good for the American people or the American taxpayer.
No, and it's so strange when you consider barely 7, maybe 8 months ago, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was saying, we're in a delicate. We have to be careful about what we do going forward in terms of raising taxes. And now she's all on board with $2, $3, $5 trillion worth of spending backed by several trillion dollars worth of tax increases. Actually, the economy is probably more fragile right now in terms of consumer confidence, inflation. The hiring picture, which looked like it was on the upswing, is now going back and forth. This is the worst possible time to tell the business world you may be facing much higher corporate and small business taxes. So, I mean, that kind of message is not going to help us get over this hill and finally start a fully growing, sustainably growing economy.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Pete Sepp, the president of the National Taxpayers Union. If people want to find out more information, go to ntu.org.
That's correct.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being here and pointing out some of this nonsense. One of the goals of this program is to try to educate people so they can learn and see what's going on behind closed doors up in D.C. I appreciate you looking at this and getting the word out so taxpayers will actually know what these politicians are trying to do, well, with our tax dollars. Thanks for being here today, Pete.
Absolutely. Let's talk again soon.
Absolutely. Once again, Pete Sepp, president of the National Taxpayers Union. Glad he was able to come on and talk about some of this. Once again, if